Everybody remembers the time when something goes wrong. And you can assume that when you do your work, some things go wrong. Some things happen, and you think about that you say to your colleague that could not see that happening. But think about that one when it happened to somebody else or you at the last time. If you walk from that moment backwards, was it really so that you did not know that it could happen? Very likely you and also other people in the organization knew that it was possible, but it still happened. And quite many things are so if we walk this through back, then we think about that if we had spent a little bit more effort on logging that concern and a little bit of effort of understanding that what do we do? How do we just even do the same things that we are doing anyway in a way that concerns that aspect, we would not have ended up in this situation. And that's risk management. In order to do that one in consistent way, you need to have some system and a method for it. Good thing is that has been done already for long time, so you don't need to reinvent this one. For example, the mentioned risk management framework ISO 31000 is describing exactly how the risk can be managed. And even though you would invent your own way of managing the risk, you would actually end up in the very same way. So therefore, there's no reason why not to do it in the same way. Also remember that there are risks on different kind of levels, on the whole organization, on the business unit, on the service, and then eventually on some change that you're doing or something else. Anyway, uh, decide first thing is to identify the hammer risk, and second one is to think about that what is the way to handle that one. And for that one, you would have the risk management process. So, risk management in the context of itsm.express, mostly the structure comes from the ISO 31000, but of course the practical application and the details are invented or brought up by the group who wrote the itsm.express. So, starting with the standard structure of objectives, this could be also the matter of definitions and key concepts. Anyway, risk is something uncertainty to meet something outcomes or achieve something. And usually those are negative ones. So something is might come in our way so that we cannot accomplish something. And that's called negative risk. Some risks are positive. I mean, so if customers buy this more than we plan to, then we have a risk that can we meet the demand. And so that's a positive thing, but also uncertainty to meet the idea of having right amount of service or right amount of products. My favorite question about the risk is that what can go wrong? That's a simple question, can be asked on all levels and all contexts, and that is a risk management, and it's very easy to answer. People don't need to even know that there is a risk management process, or when they think about it, that's a relevant part of the risk management, and when they speak up and tell their opinion, then you have the tools and the content for mitigation or some other way to address the risk. So we already earlier talked about the governance, what the organization plans to do and how that is communicated. So what can go wrong is a relevant part of that one because we most likely part of the actions is about mitigating the risks for negative things not happening, so that the good things can happen. And eventually things can go wrong in every part of the organization, and contextual understanding and actions are decided on every part of the organization. So therefore, this action is done on every part of the organization, probably in a couple of different kind of ways and tools. And also the same question, what can go wrong, is fundamental also in other contexts of process that we are doing. In information security, what can go wrong from some bad coming into our environment and trying to steal our data, or we are making changes and we plan a change. Do we understand the effect on capacity so that we can avoid the risk of service and availability as part of the change management and so on. So you will use the same approach and same thinking in multiple contexts, in many times with a formal way and even more times in informal way, discussion with your colleague about what can go wrong. Risk management itself is a process here, which means some kind of structured set of activities that should materialize in some tools with the information. But even without, if risk management is done within just as a discussion, you will have an early warning what can go wrong and uh, what is threatening our actions or our service, or what weaknesses do we have that can be exploited, that can be considered to be vulnerabilities. Which means that we are ahead of things, so we can now do something that the risk doesn't realize in the future. And we might do something differently, or we will ensure a safer environment by forcing ourselves to do something in the same way, in a safe way. For example, I don't know how many of you have been climbing in the climbing parks, which are going by the trees. At least have those ones here in Helsinki, in Finland. But you go there with the gadget that has two this kind of attachment devices, and they are connected, yet that you cannot disconnect them both at the same time. So when you connect one, the other one disconnects, and that means that you're always tied to one single rope, even though you're switching the ropes between those trees. And that is an example of effective control. So we have a built-in control to make things safe, that people are always attached to a wire, and therefore if they slip, they will never fall down from the street. So that's why we do have a controls in place, and they should be easy as that one, part of the normal actions and not require too much effort of thinking. But the risk management, identifying things, thinking what they mean, summarizing those ones, creates us an oversight on the threat landscape. So we have an understanding what kind of things can go wrong, and which one of them are more important than others, which one of them are more likely than others. And from that analysis, we know that what do we need to do them individually or in general to get into place, get them not affecting that much. And this is a whole company-wide approach. If everybody thinks about what can go wrong, then we together can make a lot better outcomes than without such thinking. So it's a process, but it's also a perspective and mindset. We have different kind of risks, different kind of things that uncertainties that prevents us from achieving different kind of things. So first one of all is are we able to keep our business and customer information secure? We talked about that one more in the context of the information security. Or are we able to, as an organization to meet our goals? I mean, volumes, customer satisfaction, revenue, that kind of stuff. Those are all risks. Then we have different kind of law that sets up requirements for our work. Are we able to protect the personal information, or are we really able to ensure that all our data is in the EU region? Those would be the compliance kind of risks. And those are the things that we do things for. But there are also organizations and people who do things for us. So things can go wrong in our suppliers. So can we, some of the suppliers or vendors, do something tricky? Or do they have their information security or other quality practices in place so that they don't affect us in negative way? So those are at least four different kind of contexts you can consider the risk to be present and needing management and attention. The risk itself in ISO 31000 way is identified, and then you analyze the situation and add likelihood and impact, and multiplication of those ones is the risk level that you're having. And if the risk level is big enough, then you need to take actions to lower the risk level. Uh, More about those things a little bit further away. But this kind of a scaling kind of approach is very handy. So you can try to differentiate relevant risks from irrelevant ones. And therefore, it's preferable and kind of out of the box thing. Same generic principle from ISO 31000 context. So the first step is that you identify the risk. So uh, you have some kind of understanding already in the organization what is acceptable, and but anyway you will identify or receive a notification of a risk, and therefore you log that one, yeah, and decide on the whether to move the risk in the next phase, which is the analysis. So in the identification phase, you may identify threats and vulnerabilities, and then you will analyze it. What will it mean if it materializes? And that after that one, you will have this previous likelihood times impact analysis and a certain kind of risk level, and then you evaluate on the risk evaluation phase what you're going to do about it. The risk evaluation, meaning taking actions, is to consider which one of the four actions might be sensible in a particular risk. First one is to do something about the risk, and that is called over here treat the risk. And that is about doing something that reduces either the likelihood or the impact or both concerning the risk. Usually this is happening by setting some kind of control in place. It can be an administrative control, in form of writing a process or policy that should be followed. Always do like this one. And we have safety practices. Like if you're a diver, you have the same setup in pair diving that you check each other's gear. So that usually is good enough, even though you might forget something, but when you have this formal check, you ensure that your ventilation is on and everything works. Second one is to do something technical. I mean, implement a firewall so that the bad guys can't get in, or the separation of networks. And we have a lot of those technical controls in place, and that is a good thing. And the third one is something physical. I mean, we put locks on doors, or we remove the risk of losing our data to US government by using technical measures like European software in physical measures like European data centers. So many of the risk management things are treating the risk, doing something about it. The second one is that let's not do anything. I mean, let's accept the risk. And this should not be taken lightly. This is the easiest option and also most misused option. So that I would consider only medium or lower risk can be accepted. There should be an organizational policy for this one, and still the documentation. And it's depending on the context and the risk appetite. I mean, if you're if it concerns people's health and safety, then you might be taking actions on quite many things. But if you're a startup with a data that doesn't isn't privacy related or something else, and you have a lot to win but nothing to lose, then you might be accepting a lot of those risks that established organizations would not. Third option is to transfer the risk. This is commonly nowadays called sharing the risk because, well, you might buy an insurance, or you might get a third party to do the job because they are more experienced in that one. So that is about sharing and or transferring the risk in this context. And it might make sense to in many cases too. Also bear in mind, I already made a reference in the governance that who decides what. So for example, if you're running services in a data center and you are afraid that some unauthorized person would actually be able to enter the data center, you are not self-managing the access to the data center, but the facilities management is. So therefore, the risk about taking care of that nobody gets in, it should be actually then transferred to that right department. So this kind of can be considered to be transferring risk to the right place. And for the fourth one is to see the good in the risk. For example, in 2026, we have things like EU Cyber Resilience Act, or NIS2 Act was in earlier, and organizations can think that this is a risk to our actions. But on the other hand, like the CRA, that sold physical products with IT are safe. It's actually a great opportunity to be the guy that is staying on the market, and the other players dropping out. So that's one option to see the risk that this is a good option, and we will have a lot of good financial benefit from this one. Why are we still facing those outcomes of non-existent or bad risk management? Probably like due to one of these pitfalls. First one is to trying to make it too difficult. I mean, you might, if you set up a risk management that is using Jira in some very vague way, and you are not use Jira user at all in otherwise, so of course that is difficult. That's more difficult than it needs to be. I don't know whether that is more difficult than using Excel, but it's still difficult, and that's one of the reasons people don't uh, ignore the risk management because they find that it's not relevant, it's usually made too difficult, and therefore that's the reason. So try to make it as easy as possible. It can be about discussion, what can go wrong, about that can be integrated easily in the day-to-day operations. It's like a peer review kind of stuff, like in diving. That is a very easy task to be done. That you get for example, even though you would share the decision-making power law in the organization, you would actually then still have the peer review of actions, or at least the validation of the service that it works after the change. So that would be an example of easy kind of integration of things and managing of risk in that context. Second one, which is also a very popular one, is that if you report the risk, it's your risk. And that discourage a lot of reporting of risks or finding something. It is true that managers don't want to hear what is wrong. It requires real self-esteem and practical, proactive looking approach to notice that the things that are wrong can be said aloud, and it will actually lead to a better handling of those things. But again, if you spot the banana covers on the floor and you tell somebody about it, and somebody says that they are now your banana covers, so then you know what to do next time, not to report about it. So try to avoid this one and make a system that anyone can report on any risk, and once it's reported, then the system of managing risks takes it to the right place, where the people who are facing the negative consequences of the risk realizing should be the owning of the risk. It should be therefore quite easy to define that who owns the risks from that onwards. The third one is the lazy risk owners. There is so much easier to say that the chances of this happening is so low that I don't need to take any actions. Some might even call this lean or agile way of working. Well, try to avoid this one. One good thing is that try to create a system that takes the risk to the person who faces the consequences and also has authority to take actions on it. And with that one, you will actually have this avoidance of lazy risk owners, because they try to optimize after that their work in a way that is also beneficial for handling the risk. And checks for this one is to ask that, like in improvements, how many of the improvement ideas led to actions in the last 12 months. The same thing with the risks, how many of the risks led to some mitigation activity in the last 6 or 12 months. And that tells you quite a lot of whether the risk owner is lazy or not. And the fourth one is that it's so easy to forbid everything. Every time you have a risk, you will add a new security feature or function or check. And when you multiply this one with 100, then eventually you have such fragmented and difficult ways of working that nobody will work according to those ones, but they will ignore all your activities. So therefore, check the controls, check whether they are valid at the moment. Ask yourself what was the problem that this control was introduced, and do we still have the problem that requires this control to exist. And usually these controls make sense in a time. So it's now we are facing the risk. Now we make the control and it works. And when people learn the control or the world changes, the risk is no longer there. So remember also to dismantle and remove the controls periodically. And that is a sign that you have actually done the risk management in the right way. Because in the real life, things that are risks now are not all of those ones are risks tomorrow. That's how the world works. So These ones are the ideas of the risk management. Uh, if you are interested, check out the ISO 31000. That is a good source. And eventually we will run into the managing risks multiple times also during this course, especially in the information security management.